Take a few minutes maybe to give an overall framework of the topic. And first I just want to give greetings from Community Shares of Greater Cincinnati. We are your local fundraiser for progressive causes that specifically work locally for social justice, economic equity, and environmental health in our city, in our region. We do have a fundraiser coming up February 16th, Valentine's weekend, and that can be found on our website, cintyshares.org. So a small commercial, but anywho, just in terms of the topic is around citizen movements and organizing, and I originally had told Bill that at this event, I'm delivering a sort of state of social justice in Greater Cincinnati, sort of like the state of the union, state of the city. So this would be like the state of social justice, and the challenge there is to sort of capture where we are locally. And so the first thing I like to do is just break down what do we mean by social justice, right? And the work that we do at Community Shares and that others do, I think, falls into a few categories, right? One, to begin with, would be social justice as defined as distributive justice, where we're concerned with the distribution of privileges and goods according to, for the benefit of the whole, of the common good, right? Distributive justice. Because of laws and policies and the social, political, and economic frameworks that we live in, we typically are living in spaces where there's varying distributions of benefits and burdens, right? So another idea that we operate from is economic justice, where meaningful work and employment and dispensation of fair pay for labor, right, is a goal. We have the quality of rights. That's where we're working for the elimination of discrimination and respect for the fundamental freedoms of civil and political rights for all, right? And finally, equality of opportunity, which requires a stable social, economic, cultural, and political conditions that enable all individuals to fulfill their full potential and contribute to the economy and society, right? So these are sort of aspirational imaginings of what the different forms of social justice are, right? And so as we dig into the current state, and I'll just move into a quick survey of what I'm at least familiar with, and there's much more, and of course we could talk for hours about all the organizing going on, and that's exciting. There's a lot of work going on. But significant citizen organizing. So I'll start with just a few areas, and then others will speak on specifics. But in the few areas that are particularly got a lot of energy around them, at least in this region, in this city, I'll start with education. And part of that is because I personally have been involved in a lot of that movement building around the fact that public education and access to education is the bedrock of democracy, and it is the great equalizer, and the path out of poverty in many ways is through education, and ultimately it's about our children, and they are our future, right? So a lot of commitment to that, and the fact that we are coming out of 2 decades of very aggressive efforts to privatize public education, and it's exacted a great toll. But there's, and the fact that all these sort of experiments and sort of imposing a business model on public education, those experiments are failing. We are seeing that when we try to impose business models on public education, Clearly, that results in winners and losers, and you can just see through data that the charter industry is not outperforming the local public school. And so that means it's really important for us to fight for reinvestment back into our public schools. Just most recently, yes?
I was taken with Trump's comment during the State of the Union about this pushing vocational education,
Yeah.
which has been tried many times. And I think that's a mistake. I think we need to train students more, give them more general skills
Yeah.
rather than specific, work skills.
Yeah, good point.
I think that's so, among other things. I found that rather ominous in terms of his remark.
Yes. Well, this administration, with his appointment of Betsy DeVos, clearly has an agenda to continue the privatization model. But just real quick, we most recently in Ohio saw ECOT was exposed for their fraud and lies about, who their kids they were enrolling, and just so people know, people have known for 20 years that ECOT was misleading the public and not really doing what they said they would, but it was only recently we were able to get enough political will to really end that.
What's ACOT?
This is an online charter program, essentially, where public school children can opt out and do an online program. So, nationally and locally, and around, I have to mention the organizing around preschool, quality preschool here in Cincinnati, striving towards a universal preschool model where every child has access to quality, affordable preschool is a game changer. And in academic circles, when you look at how to end poverty, a big part of that is early quality child education. So that's education. And then moving on to women's rights and reproductive health, I went to a speech delivered by Al Gerhardtstein about 2 years ago, who has done many things in civil rights law, but most notably was on the marriage equality Supreme Court case. And we invited him to speak on that, on marriage equality and that fight through the Supreme Court. And what was interesting was he identified what his greatest fear was. The group that he felt was the most at risk. And that was women losing ground around reproductive choice and their reproductive health. And that there really was no clear movement, unified movement, and that women were really losing at the state houses and around choice and around their reproductive health. So that was very interesting to hear from him. Since then, we have seen maybe a new emergence, a new energy around feminism and around organizing around women's issues, and I'll leave the rest to Kate. Will talk about the Women's March, but that's just another realm of new energy around organizing, specifically Planned Parenthood and their fight for their very existence, and the fact that they offer not just abortion, but much more than that in terms of, for many, they are the primary health care provider for poor women in our city. And so there's that. And then I'll move on to poverty and the Poor People's Movement. So there is a Reverend Barber, a dynamic, charismatic faith leader who started the Moral Monday movement, is launching a continuation of what Martin Luther King had envisioned before his assassination 50 years ago, a poor people's movement, going from civil rights and then moving into really economic equality.
And environmental.
And environmental. Good point. So that's sort of some real energy locally, and of course, because poverty is so multifaceted, and the fact that our city has many of us living at or below the poverty line, and it affects just everything. So that's both a local and a national movement starting. Again, the focus is going to state legislatures and really making demands of our leaders around, making sure that people who are experiencing financial hardship have representation and have some advocacy. The Moral Monday movement by Reverend Barber really started when the state legislature said they were not interested in Medicaid expansion. And it was really a political decision because they didn't want to look like they were participating in the Affordable Health Care Act, or Obamacare, as some call it. And there was this moment of moral and spiritual, really this moment that said, wait a minute, this is crazy. We have thousands of families who need health care, and to not want to participate in Medicaid expansion over some ideological or political reason just makes no sense. And so it was really this moral movement, and they started showing up every Monday at the State House, and this grew. Every Monday they came, and more came, and near the end there was thousands of people showing up at the State House demanding that they get some movement on health care. So that's the idea behind that. And finally, I just want to speak on immigration. And there's many, many more, but I have to shout out Nancy Sullivan's in the house, of course. So, but immigration and the fight for immigration is a long and quintessentially American issue. And I just recently did a little studying myself of the issue and found that as early as 1760, when the very first white colonists showed up, they brought with them some rules about who and who is not a citizen of this new land. And right away, they said, pretty much people who were diseased or prostitutes, anarchists, there was a list already of who was and was not welcome and who was able to be a citizen. And so that's moved through time, and really this whole idyllic concept of the Statue of Liberty, that give me your poor and your yearning and your, all the stuff that she says, the huddled masses. If you look at immigration policy, that's really not been our story. It's really been about economics and those in power, and just even looking at the Mexican-American experience of the Bracero program, where they brought in thousands and thousands of men from Mexico to work the fields, and then later shut them out. And kept their money. Kept their money, yes. So total exploitation. And then the Chinese, brought over the Chinese, of course, to work to build the railroad, and then, of course, did the Chinese Exclusion Act when they were done with them. So that is our legacy. And so there's a real context here with the Dreamers Act and the current fight for defining who is American and who is welcome and who, and how does that all work. So really interesting movement building around the Dreamers and the youth who've been brought here, and what is their claim to America, to citizenship, now that they're here. So that's just a quick survey. I mean, there's environmental work going on, there's housing and homelessness movements, environmental movements, and I don't want to take up all the time, but I hope that satisfied sort of what you were looking for, which is a sort of basically, for me, it's a hopefulness, and it's also a connecting into our history, which, if you look over history, movements emerge and then they fall away and they come back, and even through feminism, through immigration, through the fight for equality and education, these are fights that have been going on for a long time. And so the organizers of today, the youth coming into these movements today, can learn a lot from past wins and past losses. And so it's exciting here in Greater Cincinnati to know that there is a lot of civic engagement and organizing going on. I'll just mention, and I'll close with this, just recently there's a soccer stadium being planned, possibly in a neighborhood in Cincinnati that has really been really just abused and taken advantage of over the years, the West End, where there was a very populated, thriving business district called Kenyon Bar, African-American neighborhood that was literally demolished, half of it, because of the I-75 highway, and then in different iterations of just divestment or just taking advantage of over the years. And now here we have a soccer stadium. So many citizens came out at the Board of Education meeting to express that they want to make sure that the neighborhood and the citizens of the neighborhood are part of these discussions. And what was encouraging was that it felt to me like, and I might be naive, but it felt like it was almost a new day in Cincinnati, where typically developers, usually get their way. They do what they need to do behind closed doors, and then they show up and the deeds are signed, and it happens. And this time, the NAACP was there, the Black Agenda was there, educational justice advocates were there, neighbors, Seven Hill Neighborhood House, the nonprofit sector was there. We all convened and really sent a strong message that we did not want to see business as usual with this development. So that's just a quick little anecdote. So lots going on in Greater Cincinnati. I always tell people, if you have a passion on any of these issues, there are people working on it, and there's ways to plug in. And
Plug into immigration, we have a rapid response network we're setting up.